Our next speaker, Ross, wasn't able to catch his flight across the pond to join us, so we're going to go through his presentation via cell phone, and we're going to go through his presentation that way. So you're going to hear Ross talk all the way from across the way, and this will be how he's going to present today. So without further ado,
he won't brag. He's very humble. He's much like Joe Peterbers, who won't brag either. But here's Ross receiving his 2024 Aviation Heritage Lifetime Award last year in England. So I stuck that slide in. He didn't know about it. So we'll move along. All right, Ross Sharp. We're on to the first slide with the Me262.
Oh, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me back to where I used to live, actually, for more than 2 decades. Terry will explain all about that if you want to hear.
I will just tell you real quickly. Hey, Ross, I'll just tell him he was married to the love of his life, Jan, who was from here. Then he's moved back to England now after her passing.
Go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, thank you, man. Right, the 262 has been a bit of a passion of mine for some considerable length of time. The first slide here, slide number 3, is of the Royal Air Force Museum's Me262A-2A, built as work number 112372, and it was taken on charge by the Royal Air Force as 8482 Mike. One of just 9 original Me262 aircraft in the world, plus 1 Czech-built S-92 and 1 CS-92. This aircraft caused some controversy involving its original identity. It was stored at many RAF bases post-war, including Royal Air Force Finningley, about 35 years before I worked. Right, next slide. It shows Adolf Galland and Gerhard Barkhorn. Adolf Galland used the formation of Jagdverband 44 to recruit other Luftwaffe aces. It was natural for Galland to seek the services of Gerhard Barkhorn, the second highest scoring ace with 301 victories. Unfortunately, Barkhorn did not come to terms with the Me262 and didn't amass any victories on the type. As a colonel in the new post-war Luftwaffe, he joined the Tripartite Evaluation Squadron at Royal Air Force Cottesmore, flying the predecessor of the Harrier, the Kestrel, and managed to crash one of these jump jets on approach. After being helped from the jet, he apparently kicked the wreckage and said, "That's number 302. Who said the Germans have no sense of humor? Sadly, he and his wife Crystal died as a result of a car crash on 6th of January 1983. And next slide, please. The power of the MK-108. Here you can see the RAF Museum's Me262A-2A now on display at the RAF Museum Cosford branch, with the starboard gun bay door open, as well as a spare pair of the short-barreled MK-108 machine cannon. The RAF took possession of many of these weapons with a view to possibly re-engineering them for UK production. However, many allies chose the experimental MG213 revolver cannon instead as the basis for their post-war weapons, giving rise to the British 30mm Aden and the US 20mm M39 too. The MK-108 were amazingly potent weapons, as you will see in the next slide. It was shot shortly after World War II, with the targets being a redundant early Spitfire Mark IIB and a Bristol Brenham Mark IV twin-engine light bomber. Next, please. the effects of the MK-108 Mine-Geschoss shell. We'll see if this one runs, Terry. The 108 was a very potent shell, fired a potent shell, but unfortunately, as you can see, it didn't do a great deal of good for British aircraft. That's the tail completely severed from the Bristol Blenheim. And there goes the Spitfire tail. You see some of the damage. That's inside the gun bays on the Spitfire, and most of these shots would have been instantaneously destructive. They see the tails blown off the Spit completely. The charge inside was roughly equivalent to a standard US World War II hand grenade. And the idea is that they would penetrate the skin and then blow up inside the aircraft. The 108 had one major problem: a short effective range of about 600 yards, and also the fact that the cannon shell dropped about 4 feet from point of aim at that distance, which meant it was very, very difficult if you're in a 262 to remain on target. But as you see, the blast was absolutely incredibly destructive. That's a light bomber that's just been torn in two. Every one of these shots were officially rated as being lethal to the aircraft, that is. And that's the official report at the end, showing the lethality assessment of each individual cannon shell. Mostly fired high explosive, obviously.
Okay, Ross, thank you.
Right, next slide, please. Pleasure. Next slide, please, Terry. As you can see, first jet combat, first jet victory, question mark. Lieutenant Alfred Bobby Schreiber in ME262A-1A, work number 130017, intercepted Mosquito PR-16, November Sierra 520 of 540 Squadron out of RAF Benson. It was flown by Flight Lieutenant Albert Wall, RAF VR, with navigator Pilot Officer Albert Loban, RAF VR, and they were in the Munich area at the time. The encounter started at 30,000 feet and a spiral diving combat ensued. Schreiber attacked 3 times, the last one ending with 2 large bangs being felt inside the Mosquito. Pilot Officer Loban was told to bail out, but when he lifted the inner door in the nose, he found himself staring into space. The crew door was completely missing. The Mozzie managed to escape into cloud and eventually landed at Ancona, Italy. That was part of the Foggia complex of airfields. Schreiber claimed and was awarded a victory. The Mosquito was repaired in Italy and returned to base at Benson, where it crashed on landing and was a write-off. So I could suppose you could say it was a delayed victory of sorts. Next slide, please, Terry. Bloody Terrified, the biography of Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, BEM, DSC. Even crews of the redoubtable Mosquito feared the Me262. In this book, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, BEM, DSC, RAF, and his navigator, Flight Lieutenant Doug Raymond, DSC, RCAF, describe a harrowing nighttime attack by a persistent Me262 adversary over Germany. Alerted by the rearward-looking warning radar fitted in their Mosquito, Colin threw the Mozzie into a high-speed spiral dive. Straightening out, they were attacked again. Another dive followed. Flight Lieutenant Raymond knelt on his seat looking rearwards. "I can't see him," he yelled. "Good," yelled Colin, "because if he could see you, then you would be dead." They made it back to their number 8 Pathfinder group base, amazingly. Colin flew 50 missions, no less than 13 of them over Berlin, 10 of these consecutively. I'll just let that sink in a bit. I'm proud to call Colin Bell my friend. Next slide, please. Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, BEM DFC, BEM because the King just honored him in the last honors list. As you can see, here is Colin Bell, as sprightly as ever, in front of the Airbus-sponsored replica Me262 at the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Hangar at Royal Air Force Coningsby, Lincolnshire. The BBMF has both a Lancaster and several Spitfires on charge, two types that the Me262 did meet in combat. On March the 5th, 2026, Colin will celebrate his 105th birthday. For a man used to beating the odds, even against the 262, I for one hope that we can all celebrate this auspicious occasion. Next slide, please. One last look at Colin, and he is in company of Flight Lieutenant Des Curtis, DSC, Croix de Guerre, at a VIP dinner we attended at the Royal Air Force Club, London. Sadly, we lost Des Curtis last year at 100. He was the only man left alive who had sunk a U-boat with a 57mm autocannon. Colin, who always reminds me of a cheeky elf, is still going strong at 104.
I'm just going to tell one quick story in preparing for this talk. We found out the man that was shooting at Colin Bell in that epic fight where he was trailing him and Colin did everything he could to get away from him, and he did. It's a famous night fighter. So Colin Heaton, who's a friend of mine, identified who it was for us. And maybe you could tell the story, Ross, of when we identified who it was, and I said, well, maybe you should tell Colin Bell who was shooting at him, and what was Colin, or what was the reaction? Ross?
Yes.
Could you say what your reaction was?
Hello?
Can you say what your reaction was, or what Colin's reaction was to possibly finding out who was shooting at him?
Well, in mixed company it might be a little difficult, but I'll tone it down. I think he said, bloody hell. But he's a man of quite amazing talents, Colin. And he was an after-dinner speaker until he was about 100. But he's slowing
didn't you
down
say
a bit
he had
now.
the reaction? Didn't you say he had the reaction was, the man was trying to kill me. Why would I care to meet him or care who he was?
I know, yes. However, we did manage to persuade him to stand in front of the BBMF hangar with the 262 in it, and I've got a couple more photographs like that. he's calmed down as I think since he's got over 100, he might. Well, let's put it this way: he drove up to Lincolnshire for a private party we were having at the International Bomber Command Centre. He drove himself, and it's 120 miles. But he did have a minder with him, he said, just in case he got lost. He said he always needed a navigator.
I'll move on to the next slide.
Okay. Right. Replica Me262 and RAF Coningsby BBMS Spitfire 5B, Alpha Bravo 910. This is a great shot, I must admit. The Me262 replica 501224 had been met over the White Cliffs of Dover by a Spitfire 5B of the Royal Air Force Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, flown by Squadron Leader Mark Sugden, who I know, from RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire, the flight's home base. The 262 was flown by the Swiss Airbus pilot Gerhard Gary Kreitenbuller, who I had the great fortune to meet. I know where there's a copy of this photograph, but it's slightly better than this one because it's signed by both the pilots. It used to be on my office wall. I'm not quite sure where it is now, Terry.
Tim, can you see that picture anywhere in the room? Tim says it's on the chair on the left side of the table, signed by both pilots. I wonder where that came from.
I wonder where that came from.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Oh, could you skip 2, please?
Yes, sir.
And we'll end up
Is this going to be
with
covered?
modern Airbus.
Is this going to be covered tomorrow? Tomorrow's presentation?
Yes, it is.
Oh, so people
Yeah,
want to come back tomorrow, you say?
Oh, there's another 2 combats for tomorrow.
Okay, well that's why they want to come back, because it'll be new material. So I've moved along to the modern
Yeah,
Airbus.
absolutely.
I've moved along to the modern Airbus sponsored Me262 and beyond 2024.
Yeah. Airbus graciously agreed to bring their modern version of the Me262 to the Royal International Air Tattoo in 2024. RIAT, as it's known, is held annually at RAF Fairford, a United States Air Force-operated base in Gloucestershire, England. It may have General Electric CJ610 turbojet engines rather than the short-lived Junkers UMO 004B, but it certainly looks the part. Galland was reporting that an overhaul on the UMO 004B as being needed after just 12 and a half hours by the end of the war. According to a good friend of mine, Captain Eric Winkle Brown, RN, the scrap life of the 004B was just 50 hours. This was due to the lack of strategic alloying metals to make high-quality heat-resisting steel. Next slide, please. Me262 V3, this is Versux 3, dry, PC-UC, the third test example. Here you can see the third test example, hence V3, of the Me262. No armament is fitted, but we have moved on from the nose-mounted Junkers Ju-210G piston engine of only 718 horsepower, with which the prototype V1 made its first flight on the 18th of April 1941. It went on to make 47 flights with this engine. Also, the V3 still had the problematic tail undercarriage. This meant that the jet engines forced the tail wheel into the ground, and you could only get the tail to rise by tapping the brakes as the 262 accelerated. The RLM, the German aviation authorities, demanded a tricycle undercarriage. 1,433 Me262s were built, of which only approximately 800 reached the Luftwaffe. Next slide, please.
Ross, I'm going to take a little detour, if you don't mind, back to a previous slide that I stuck in of Joe Peterburs, who will be appearing at 2:30, I think, right? 2:30, to speak here. This is him with the Collins Foundation Me262, dual control replica, the white one, in October of 2024 at the Wings Over Houston Air Show. Joe gave me this picture to show. I have another question for y'all. Now that we're showing this thing down in Dallas where it's based, wouldn't you like to see both Joe and the Collins Foundation Me262 appear at Oshkosh in July of 2026? Where is board member Hunter to hear this? Hunter, you weren't supposed to leave, you know. You can't leave me here without the training wheels. Anyway. Yeah, he's got to hear stuff like this. Besides, I owe Joe something. Joe asked me if he could sit in the 262, and as far as I know, even though we came to Oshkosh this year and there was one there, I don't believe he ever got a seat in it. So I still owe him that. That's the man you will see with the Collins Foundation white one. You see it there. Well, doesn't he deserve to be able to sit in it? Excuse me, what? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Are there any, I'm a lifetime member too. This is what I want to see happen. Are there any other lifetime members here? Members? Any members? Yeah, well, you guys can, voice your opinion. I mean, you guys make this go. I mean, you can voice your opinion. I mean, come on. We couldn't get the 262 here. I mean, Rob would have loved to have it here. It's just not possible because of where we are. But there's plenty of space up at Oshkosh, and there's no reason not to bring it, and there's no reason not to have Joe again. All right, Ross, I'll quit ad-libbing and put it back to you. So now up to the first tricycle undercarriage Me262, the V5.
Okay. First tricycle undercarriage V5. RLM's demand for a tricycle version was quickly met. Here we see the first of its kind, V5. Again, an early purely experimental aircraft with no provision for armament. Looking at the weathered exterior of the hangar, it would seem that this is Halle, an airfield relatively close to Leipzig. Next slide, please. R4M rocket, deadly with the blast of over 1 pound of Torpex. This German, unguided, folding-fin air-to-air rocket could reach more than 1,500 feet per second velocity, and the high charge-to-weight ratio of the head was deadly. The Me262 was just one of the Luftwaffe aircraft that could carry this projectile under the wings. I'll skip the next paragraph. A simple grooved wooden tray held 12 rockets per side in the Me262, and they were fired electrically. Effective range was from 660 to 1,100 yards, with the maximum range being 1,640 yards. This rocket design went on to inspire many small diameter air-to-air and air-to-ground rockets in various countries post-war. Could you skip one slide, please, Terry, and go to number 19?
The side view of Yellow 4?
Yep. RAF Museum's Milestones of Flight Gallery. Built in March 1945, the RAF's Me262A-2A barely had time to be issued to the Luftwaffe before being surrendered to the RAF. The RAF had at one stage no less than 7 Me262A models, and there is some confusion as to this machine's exact identity. It is known to have been flown to the UK via Twente in Holland and was possibly used for mechanical testing as well as short handling flights from Farnborough. Please note to the lower right the red-black rear of the one-off Miles Mohawk, commissioned as a personal aircraft by Colonel Charles Lindbergh. Next slide, please. Here is Yellow 4 at Cosford when I tracked her down, this time with the port gunway door open to display the Mark 108 cannon. You'll see that it's had a little ding on the port inlet there. I think we need a little bit of metal work, but we might just leave it as it stands. Next slide, please. An experiment in Me262 armament. Here we see a truly monstrous weapon. The experimental Messerschmitt 262A1A/U4, work number 170083, one of just two so modified, was captured by the US troops at the Messerschmitt factory in Augsburg. This one was equipped with a Rheinmetall Mauser BK5 50mm gun, originally intended as an anti-tank weapon, with 21 shells in a semicircular magazine. Neither of the modified Me262s saw action, but 53 Me410 heavy fighters of 2 ZG-26 did. In 6 battles with 8th Air Force heavies, they claimed no less than 129 B-17s and 4 B-24 bombers. Next slide, please. Never got off the ground. Just in case you were wondering why only 800 of the 1433 Me262s that were built reached the Luftwaffe, this should give you a clue. The United States Army Air Force heavy bomber streams, sometimes stretching more than 100 miles in length, battered the jets wherever they could be found. This led to Albert Speer, Minister for Armaments and War Production, to move many facilities underground. Next slide, please. Here you see U.S. personnel examining underground Me262 production. As you can imagine, building aircraft in underground facilities brings with it major problems of access, working conditions, and other inefficiencies. Nevertheless, the Germans had no option at this stage of the war. Next slide, please. Me262B1A/U1, Red 8. An Me262 night fighter in South Africa. Here we see a night fighter version of the Me262A, and it's in South African hands. Fitted with the U1 set, that is an Umrust Bausatz set, meaning a factory-fitted conversion only. You couldn't do this in the field. This includes the Neptune, a low to mid VHF band airborne intercept radar. These aircraft were converted from 2-seat trainers. This model of the Me262 would likely to have been the type that attacked Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell and his navigator, Flight Lieutenant Doug Redmond. Fortunately, the jet night fighter arrived just too late to make a significant difference in losses to RAF Bomber Command's main force over Germany. Next slide, please. Me262A-2A, Sturmvogel, Black X, Australian War Memorial, Canberra, Australia. Situated in the Australian War Memorial, Australian Capital Territory, Black X retains not only the lower pair of 30mm Mk108 cannon of this variant, but according to the Australian War Memorial, it is, and I quote, the only Me262 bomber variant to survive and is the only remaining Me262 wearing its original wartime paint. As a former museum professional, I admire this conservation effort. It parallels the UK Fleet Air Arm Museum's Goodyear FG-1 Corsair, also in original World War II paint. That World War II paint is rather worn, of course, and it also includes some markings applied at Farnborough, where it was assigned the ident of Airmin 81, that is, Air Ministry 81. As an aside, it is one of only 2 Me262 aircraft in the Southern Hemisphere. Hitler's demand for his Schnell bomber, rather than fighters, only managed to slow the program down. Next slide, please. Cockpit of an Me262. Here is the typical Me262 cockpit layout. Despite the small size of the aircraft's cockpit, it is practical, and everything seems to fall readily to hand. The reflector gun sight, offset to starboard of the centerline, is characteristic of German fighters and fighter bombers. Next slide, please. Avia S-92 Turbina. First flight, 26th of August, 1946. Avia in Czechoslovakia had a full set of drawings, some components and spares for the Me262. So a decision was made to build their own version of the fighter post-war. There was also no problem in acquiring Mk-108, as these were still held in some quantity in Czechoslovakia. However, their weapon-specific ammunition was more difficult, and this might have been a factor in the S-92's retirement and the early adoption of the Russian-designed MiG-15. All 9 S-92 aircraft were withdrawn by 1950. The type's major problem was the engines. The M04, which was the locally overhauled version of the UMO 004, was an axial compression turbojet. It was started, as was the UMO 004, by a very small full-start piston engine inside the intake spike. However, the turbine blades of the engine suffered from creep at high temperatures, leading to impact with the combustion chamber walls. Even with gentle throttle movements, the engines demanded service after every sortie, and life was limited to 300 hours. To make matters worse, there was no means of completely rebuilding the engines, so they had to be scrapped when they reached this point. Next slide, please. Avia built CS-92 V-35 in Czech markings. The original finish was surplus RLM Grau 02 German paint. This 2-seat trainer was constructed from various parts and sub-assemblies in what was then Czechoslovakia by Avia. It flew with the Czech Air Force before being retired and used for ground instruction. It is now in a museum in Prague, painted in Luftwaffe markings. The locally manufactured M04, copies of the UMO 004 engine, did not tolerate rapid changes in throttle settings and could flame out. The CS-92 trainers were retained a little longer than the single-seat version, finally coming out of service by 1951, although some became instructional airframes. Next slide, please. Here is the surviving CS-92 in Luftwaffe markings. With the loss of the first single-seat S-92, Czech pilots were hardly thrilled with their new mounts. Each were virtually hand-built made from some spares and from drawings in the Avia factory, which had been captured intact by the advancing Russian forces as World War II wound down. The S-92 was a subject of some interest from the fledgling Republic of Yugoslavia Air Force, which had no jets at this time. They had P-47 Thunderbolts and would later receive the F-84G Thunderjet. It was rumored that the new state of Israel was also considering the jet. This might have been fostered by the fact that the Czechs had sold their version of the Bf-109G, the S-199, to Israel. Next slide, please. VVS Me262. The Russians were eager to examine and fly the Me262, which had been active on the Eastern Front as the Russian armies pressed ever close to the borders of the Reich. Here we see a VVS test pilot. Note the notepad strapped to his knee, freeing himself from his parachute after a test flight in a captured example of the Russian jet. Next slide, please. Damaged Me262-2A/U2 V555. This is just one of two. A Sturmvogel with a glazed bombardier nose. This was an attempt to overcome the great difficulty that Sturmvogel pilots had in aiming their bombs. It was not adopted. Actually, it looks remarkably like the experimental British F-8 Prone Meteor. Next slide, please. Watson's Whizzers and Operation Lusty. Under command of Colonel Harold E. Watson, a former Wright Field pilot and engineer, a group of United States Army Air Force personnel scoured the former occupied Europe, Germany, and Austria, looking for jet and rocket planes to take stateside for full examination, aka Operation Lusty. Colonel Watson is in the center of the front row in this photograph. Basically, if you have seen the 2014 film, The Monuments Men, and I enjoyed it immensely, Watson's Whizzers did it with planes. Considering that all transport was by sea or rail, I was stunned to find out that some Me-262 aircraft were seen at Wright Field in early June 1945. Next slide, please. Another rare bird, the Me-262A-1A/U3, the reconnaissance machine. The reconnaissance version of the 262, the Messerschmitt Me-262A-1A/U3, was rare. Fitted with either an RB-20/30 or RB-75/30 camera, it is identifiable by the bulged nose. This is work number 500453, White 25, which was captured by the 54th Air Disarmament Squadron, United States Army Air Force. It was shipped to the Zone of Interior and flown to Freeman Field, Indiana, on the 19th of August 1945, and there serialed Foxtrot Echo 4012. It was used in classified comparison tests, and I still haven't been able to access those. Anyway, if you could skip one slide for me, please, that's for tomorrow. And we'll go to slide 35. The dark side, Voldwork forest site. This site was one of many camouflaged, dispersed assembly sites built in forest. Its code name was Kuno 1, and in early 1945, it was turning out no less than 5 Me-262s a day from a pine forest near Leipheim, the city which had seen the first ever flight of an Me-262. The production line was a long forest road, concealed as much as possible by tall trees. When completed, the jets would be towed onto a straight stretch of the nearby A8 Stuttgart to Munich Autobahn, then flown away. Sadly, this mold work, like many others, used concentration camp labor. The prisoners were housed in wooden barracks under the trees. Kuno 1 was captured by United States forces on 28th of April, 1945. Well, that concludes our presentation for today. Tomorrow will be a slightly different effect. Over to you, Terry.